Thank you. As we begin our second plenary session, we turn our attention to a transformative approach that offers real-world insights and global perspectives on how community-anchored science initiative can build the future that is informed, inclusive, empowered, especially in the face of climate challenges, social change, sustainable development. To lead this important conversation, allow me to introduce our plenary speaker. Our plenary speaker is an associate professor of statistics at KU Leuven and a tenure-track professor at Hasselt University, conducting research within the Inter-University Institute of Biostatistics, Statistical Bioinformatics. He co-founded the Statistical, Ecological, and Epidemiological Modeling Group and leads international training program in ecological statistics. His work focuses on spatio-temporal modeling, ecological and biodiversity studies, and statistical methods of large-scale citizen science data. With over 60 publications in leading journals and key contributions to major initiatives such as the Great Corona Study, he continues to advance impactful, data-driven research across disciplines and regions. It is an honor to welcome him to our conference. To deliver his talk on citizen science as a scientific and educational paradigm, please join me in giving a round of applause to Dr. Thomas Neyens.
Thank you. And thank you all for being here. Thank you for the invitation. It's very, very kind that you have thought about inviting me to all the way to Manila. By coincidence, I was already in San Jose City. I'm there for a workshop that we're co-organizing. It's actually ongoing now, but there's a free day of activities, so that was ideal for me to come here. This is directly after lunch, and it's probably the most difficult time to pay attention because you're still enjoying what you have eaten and then you doze off. And now there's a statistician in front of you, so we're going to learn about statistics. That's even worse, right? But anyway, we're going to do our best, and if you don't pay attention, you'll get questions from me on statistics. No, that's a joke. Okay, so today I'll talk about citizen science as a scientific and an educational paradigm. If we look at the Philippines, and I don't have to tell you that, but there are some problems, and if we focus on environmental problems, there's a lot of pollution, habitat loss, exploitation and climate change. That's the more global problem. However, climate change affects coastal communities a lot, and obviously then the Philippines has a large coastal community, so it's affected by it. I don't have to tell you this, you know all of this, but this is a bit the start of many things that I'm doing here. Maybe you have to turn that one off. This one. Because there is feedback if I... So, now, research has shown that community-driven environmental protection is very effective to do sustainable protection. And that is the only type of nature conservation that we want to have, that is sustainable. And also research has shown that Filipino locals, and actually a lot of them want to engage in nature conservation because they understand that it's very important, but they also say that they're often insufficiently heard by the legislators. Now, I think that public participation is very important to democratize conservation. And therefore, we have been working on community-driven environmental citizen science. Well, this is already being established in Asia, and this, I do not have anything to do with citizenscience.asia, but that's a website that has some plans to do this on a more global level or a more regional level in Asia. But what I've learned from partners that I collaborate with is that there are often institutional capacity lacks in citizen science methodology. Because citizen science is not only participating with citizens and then trying to make everything sustainable, it's also a methodological question on how to do that properly, but also just me as a statistician, suppose that you obtain then data that were delivered by non-experts, how do you properly analyze them in order to yield scientific results that are still of high impact? Because if they are of high impact and you give that back to the communities, then, and they have an ownership over that, that makes their voice very strong in the public debate. So we want to obtain good results. We want to obtain high quality results by citizen science. Now, what I'll talk about today is first I'll introduce myself a little bit more. Then I'll talk about citizen science as a scientific paradigm. And I will also introduce the international training program ITP, 𝗀𝗶𝘁𝗶. 𝗀𝗶𝘁𝗶 stands for Co-Creating Environmental Citizen Science Capacity in the Philippines. It's an ongoing project. Actually, it will end now, in a month from now, and we are thinking about our next steps, but I'll talk about that later. Then afterwards, I'll talk about citizen science as an educational paradigm. How can you integrate this in education at multiple levels? And lastly, I'll talk about how I see the future, and maybe we could all, or some of you would be interested in collaborating. So, who am I? Well, this is me. These are my two beautiful children, Anna Lou and Jacoby. I've also, my wife is not on the picture, but I love her a lot, and I miss them when I'm here, but I'm very happy to be here. But I'm an associate professor of biostatistics, and I work at two universities, 50-50. One university is Hasselt University, which has our group there, the Data Science Institute, has a large connection with the Global South. We have a master program that is specifically made for people coming from the Global South. So we have a lot of Filipino students there as well. And through that collaboration with many countries, I've been involved in a lot of this work. I also work at the Catholic University of Leuven, that's KU Leuven. That's the largest university in Belgium. Also, that's the smallest one, so I'm in both extremes. And so I'm actually a biologist, bachelor and master of biology. Afterwards, I did the master of statistics, and I did a PhD in statistics. And it's actually interesting, maybe as an anecdote, to say that as a child, I was always interested in animals. My dad showed me documentaries of elephants, etc., and I wanted to become a biologist. And I wasn't really interested in mathematics, because statistics is mathematics, but I was not really interested in it. And I remember that there was a teacher, just to show you how important you all are, or teachers are, a teacher who told me after I did a test, I was in the second, like, I don't know the system, let's say I was 14 years old. I got a class on mathematics. I didn't care about mathematics, but then my teacher of mathematics told me that I did a very good test. I was the best of the class. And he announced it in the class. Thomas had the best score. And he said, Thomas, I'm very proud of you. And that triggered something in me, while all of a sudden I thought mathematics is something I want to do more, because somebody's proud of me that I can do this. And now I'm an associate professor in statistics. And these small things matter a lot. So just to tell you how important teaching is. Anyway, my research interests now, and some of these things will be a bit, the lamps are in front of it, but I'll just tell you, is I'm mainly interested in spatial statistics. So that means geographical analysis. And I often do that within the setting of environmental conservation. And I often work with messy data about complex data sets. and typically on biodiversity and typically collected by citizens. And I'll just give a few examples. But what is citizen science? Well, it's an engagement method that actively involves citizens in various stages of the scientific process. And I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. One type of study that I'm often working with is studies conducted by naturalists. This is a person, it's actually a PhD student of mine who's also a naturalist. And there are many people in Belgium that go out on a Saturday or on a Sunday afternoon to watch birds or to watch butterflies. And then there is this system, observation.org. There's also iNaturalist, eBird, and many of these databases where you can insert your data. And then it's being put in this huge database. There's also an automatic recognition app in Belgium, which is called 𝗶𝘶𝗫, but iNaturalist has similar things, and eBird as well. And that has been a game changer as well, because many people now have that app and they just take a picture, it's identified, you can send it directly to the database. So it's a huge database. And I just want to show you, I will not talk too much about the methodology that we're using here, because I only have 1 hour. But because we have such a wealth of data, we can do things that were not possible if you would only work with expert scientists. Because it's a huge amount of data, although we have to take care about the quality of the data. But so in this is one study that we did, where we looked at all butterfly species in Flanders. So Flanders is the northern part of Belgium. And so these are all maps of Flanders. And this is one of, let's say, I believe there are 78 butterfly species in Belgium. This is one of those where we had data from, and this is not just the data visualized, this is data analyzed in a model where we correct for citizen science sampling problems. And afterwards, based on that information, we then predict what the probability is that this species will be found at specific locations or is present at specific locations. And we do this in space and through time. So it's a spatio-temporal model. And this is a species, for example, that due to climate change has appeared from the south. So in 2009, you could find it almost never or nowhere. But in 2018 and 2019, it became much more prevalent. And this is known about this species, that it's a heat-loving species. And because of climate change, Belgium is increasing in heat or in temperature. So this is one of the results. We have similar results for other species. This is also one species that you see now much more than you would see them 15 years ago. And it's just, I'm showing this because it is really important to understand that it is because of the citizens collecting data that we can do this. This is impossible to do with experts. A spatio-temporal model needs a lot of data. And if you would do this with experts, so with biologists who go out into the field to collect data, the advantage is that they will probably do it in a more standardized way, but the disadvantage is it costs a lot of money and it is very time-consuming. So that is one of the purely scientific benefits of citizen science. Obviously, the main purpose of citizen science should be, and I'll talk about that in a moment, giving back to the communities, etc. But I'm just showing you that purely from a scientific point of view, citizen science can help us a lot in these very complex questions. Another study we did was on spider biodiversity. And this now is in the province of Limburg, that's one province in Belgium, where the setup was a little bit different. So we had citizens that set out traps on the ground floor. Then the species crawl in, they are conserved, and after a few weeks, the person would come and get the trap and would determine all the different species that he or she found. And if that is one sampling event, we had in between 1976, so this is, 76, that's already ongoing for 50 years. We have, from then until now, around 12,000 sampling events, so that's a lot of data, at 1,300 unique locations by 79 observers. And in total, 325 spider species were collected. We have their presence, their numbers, etc. Now, this was, again, a citizen science study, and it was all set up by the citizens. So they chose where to collect data. They chose when to empty the traps, etc. And this affects, obviously, your results. So, again, we as statisticians then have to think, how do we deal with this? How do we find signals in suboptimal data? And that's a very interesting methodological question. So we developed methods for this. We then get, so these were all the locations in Limburg. And we get then for every of these 325 species, I'm just showing you 3 now, within the province, the probability that you'll find them at a specific location or that they're present there. And also their trends through time, they're maybe less visible for you, but you see some of these species go up in their occurrence, but then go down afterwards. Some go down, some go up throughout the years. So we have all of this information for these species. And we can then look at, so who here is a mathematics teacher or is working on mathematics? Raise your hand. I will not ask you a question. A few. So if you just think about a line, if you think about the slope, if it is positive, it's going up. If it's negative, it's going down. If it's 0, it's flat. Nothing is happening. So if you look at the slopes of, during the last 50 years, the occurrence of these species, if they're going up, it means they're now occurring more than they used to. If it's going down, they're decreasing in occurrence. If they're flat, then nothing, they're pretty stable. And so for all 325 species, we here have, for every of those species a line, and that's just a confidence interval, that's the statistical technicality, that shows us that probably the slope lies between these 2 values. And so for all of these here, because this is a 0 line, for all of these here, we are pretty confident that the slope truly lies above 0, so that they're increasing in their occurrence. And for some species down here, we are pretty sure that they're decreasing in occurrence. And for those over here, we cannot really significantly say that they are increasing or decreasing. And so through this study, we can show that 93 species show a negative trend, 65 species a positive, and 167 species that there is no clear support for positive or negative trend. And again, we find these things because this is not known for our region. We find this because of the citizens, because they help us with data collection. And a very interesting result, and I'll just focus here on this one. The phenology of a species means when it's active throughout the year. Think about a butterfly. It will first be a caterpillar, then it will turn into a butterfly. And in Belgium, we have winter, then it's cold, it snows, and then afterwards it becomes spring, it becomes hot. And so through a trigger, a heat trigger, the caterpillar becomes a butterfly. The same goes for all other insects. And so for spiders, it's a bit similar. Different life stages and activity, you see that throughout the year. But it's all due to temperature triggers. And if we look at the peak of their activity, so when they're most active, and we would look at 1975, we see, and this is only for one species, but we see this for many of them, that their peak activity was around the 150th Julian date of the year. And so, through time, this became earlier. So if we look at 2025, in Belgium, or at Limburg, but that is representative of Belgium, most species are most active. It then democratizes science and gives citizens a stronger voice in policy making. And through all of this, what I've shown here, I have thought about a theory of change. And in a theory of change, there are multiple ways of looking at this, and this is particular for the Philippines. There's the first step, and that is the control that we have. We as a community of people that are going to work together, we as teachers, for example, we want to strengthen citizen science skills of educators themselves. Because if educators know this, they will educate it to others. I think that is the start of everything that is needed. And through this, hopefully there will be a direct influence that there is more emphasis on civic studies among educators, their students, and professionals, young professionals that have learned this in school. The indirect influence is then that there's sustainable citizen science that yields co-created environmental knowledge. And then the long-term impact, what you want to create is you want Philippine citizens to have an increased voice in environmental policy making. That is the end goal. Obviously, I cannot directly go to the end goal, or we, but we need to start with the things that we can do. And that's, I think, education. And I think here, the main thing is educating the educators. Maybe some educators already know these things, but some who don't know, it is very interesting for them to learn about this. Now, in order to do that, we have set up the international training program 𝗀𝗄𝐶IVL, and I'll talk about that for a moment. 𝗀𝗄𝐶IVL stands for Co-Creating Environmental Citizen Science Capacity in the Philippines, and it contains 4 train-the-trainer workshops where we had 2 courses per workshop, 1 week per course, so a 2-week workshop. And it was all about citizen science in environmental research. And it was funded by 𝗬𝗠, which is a Flemish funding agency. And through that funding, we could provide more than 20, actually 40 in the end, 40 to 50 scholarships per workshop, including 3 for non-Filipinos. And those scholarships would cover travel, accommodation, and catering for the 2 weeks. We focused on university-level trainers, and there was an application process for each workshop, so we always made a selection. We had new and returning participants for each workshop, and we had a mix of topics: quantitative and qualitative methodology and citizen science, conservation, and we also had some budget for research and networking. And this was led by Norberto Mila from VSU, 𝗖𝗶𝘁𝗶𝘶𝗶, which you saw on the, who you saw on the picture from MSU IIT, and then myself, with many other collaborators. And the theory of change there was similar to what I had before, but particularly for this project, we wanted to strengthen citizen science skills of local academics through these 4 workshops. And we wanted, this is that holistic design of data analysis. Study design and data collection was mostly covered in the first 2 workshops, data analysis and communication in the last 2 workshops. And also the results of that would be used in a Master of Biostatistics curriculum development at VSU as well, because the statistical courses could then be used in that curriculum. Now, as a direct influence, we want there to be more emphasis on civic studies among academics and professionals. And then through that, the indirect influence was to, that there was sustainable citizen science that yields co-created environmental knowledge. And then again, the same impact as before, Philippine citizens have an increased voice in environmental policy making. But here we focus really on academic learning, and I'm going to talk later, I'll go a bit faster now, about how you can do this in citizens, in basic education as well. So I'm just going to show you some of the topics that we've seen. This was the first workshop in VSU in 2023, where we covered in the first week participatory research methods for citizen science. So the theory on participation, deontological issues, and co-creation, the theory on that, given by Maricel do Nascimento Roca from Hasselt University and KU Leuven. She's a postdoc. In the second week, there was a course on observational studies and causality, because that's a very difficult issue. All of these studies in citizen science are observational, not experimental studies. And therefore, we need to think about how to deal with that. So the concept of observational studies, causality, statistical considerations, etc. Some pictures, was very successful. Some like really interactive classes. There's some nice people from MSU again. It was very rewarding. And also in the evenings, we had some fun. We had a drink, we networked, and we started to build a group of people that were all thinking about citizen science and how to, well, yeah, bring it to the next level. Second workshop was at MSU IIT, and that was about environmental monitoring and management by Nathalie Beenaerts from Hasselt University. Was on, for example, socio-ecological interactions, very important for communities, conservation, etc. And they made research proposals that were, by the way, submitted. Some of them were submitted to DOST afterwards. Second week was study design for observational studies in citizen science. That's what I was teaching on power analysis, sampling methods, spatial design. Again, a lot of fun. We had a lot of fun, but also we learned a lot of things. Then the third workshop was again in VSU. Here we learned about communicating statistics, communicating uncertainty, like I said before, very important. Statistical visualization, reporting statistics. And then also a bit more advanced, generalized linear models. Many ecological or biodiversity models are what we call generalized linear models. So the introduction to that, which was given by 𝗧𝗵𝗁𝗶𝗲 from Hasselt University. In the fourth workshop, again at MSU IIT, and this is the last workshop, that was just half a year ago. We had again Marie-Stella, but now to give a course on data equity and sustainable citizen science, on foundations on data equity and data justice, bias in citizen science, and ethical data collection and governance. The second week was really on spatio-temporal statistics for environmental citizen science, which was taught by myself and a PhD student, 𝗬𝗏𝗏, really on spatial-temporal models and how to correct for bias in citizen science studies when you're looking at those data. And again, some pictures. So the direct influence of that, which you can, in a way, evaluate. So I asked a few persons, like, what did you now achieve with this? And I learned, but it was only to a small pool of people who contributed or who were participating in these in this project, is that ITP-based knowledge was integrated in more than 12 university-level courses on fisheries, conservation management, experimental design, and applied maths. But also ITP had contributed or led to more than 10 research projects and more than 5 joint project proposal submissions by participants who didn't know each other beforehand. So they really started to work together and submitted research proposals to DOST, and some of those were successful. Things on agriculture, fisheries, biodiversity, ecology, and economy. For example, that Mamasila project was partly funded by DOST. Now, we can even look at indirect influence a bit, because sustainable citizen science yields co-created environmental knowledge. If you would define it as, are there publications about this? Yes, there are. There are many things being published now. This is by Kent, one of the participants. And this one is by 𝗬𝗏𝗏. He's a senior author there. And this is really a paper that takes all the ideas from ITP and turns it into a research. And this has now been submitted, I believe. It's not been published yet. But empowering communities in citizen science to assess the diversity and density of sea cucumbers in 2 harvesting sites in Mindanao. So it really applies these methods. So you see that really people are taking this up. Now, there are also some further projects. We have the Southeast Asia Biostatistics Research and Empowerment for Zonal Excellence, 𝗬𝗶𝘁𝗁𝗏, which is also a 𝗬𝗏𝗏𝗏 project, which tries to do joint research initiation between 4 universities in the Philippines and Indonesia. And one of these projects is about citizen science in coral reef monitoring. And that is conducted by 𝗬𝗏𝗏𝗏, and she's doing her PhD at MSU IIT, together with Hugh Hasselt, with me as a supervisor. Another interesting project, which I will also mention at the end of my talk, is the a coral reef diversity research and monitoring project called Reef Dream, which is a short initiative that's another type of project, again by 𝗬𝗏𝗏𝗏. And the promoters are, again, Norberto Mila from VSU, Rafael Dumoulin, a biologist from VSU, and myself. And it's about coral reef biodiversity monitoring through citizen science and a bit of expert science, and then fusing those 2 data sets. Because actually, there's also a nice approach. If you have some expert science that can be used as golden standard data, and then can be used to correct for problems in the citizen science data. But the citizen science data is often much higher or larger in sample size. So specific techniques for data fusion, that's what we're going to explore there. This is that Reef Dream project that has just been started, and it makes use of the AL1 method. I'll talk about that in a moment. So, yeah, some other small funding projects, but those are maybe less important. What is important is the Philippine Citizen Science Network. It's below here on the slide, but this is something that we have tried to set up with the ITP participants. And yesterday we even had a meeting to really formalize that as a formal, like register it as a formal consortium. And we're talking about that. And it's also through this that I want to do some other, or we want to do some other initiatives, want to take some other initiatives. Now, how to create impact? That impact, the thing that was missing here, and we learned that afterwards, is, okay, we have now communicated in a scientific way, but how are we going to translate this to policy? And so we had some leftover money, and we could, and this is now ongoing, in CLSU, we could organize a 5th workshop where that would be about creating impact. How to turn citizen science results into policy briefs. And the teacher, and that's also very nice, would not be a Belgian teacher, it would be somewhere from here. And it was 𝗧𝗵𝗁𝗂𝗍𝗶 from MSU IIT, who has experience in this. We also invited policymakers. There's also, tomorrow and the day after, some kind of conference communication event where all people tell what they have been doing in citizen science. So that's a very nice wrap-up of our ITP project. Now, how would I, having learned about all of this, how would I turn this into an educational paradigm? Well, I think that citizen science for the teachers here is interesting because you can integrate real-world research projects. For example, teachers can incorporate ongoing citizen science projects into their classes. For example, if you think about biology, you can go out with your students or your class, with your students, and collect biodiversity data for, let's say, eBird, iNaturalist, or the one that I mentioned, observation.org, which also here has, there are also data that are collected here. For environmental science, for example, monitor local water quality through, there's this Mazdan app from the IM for Manila Bay program. Probably somebody from the university that has developed this is here. So you can use that app to collect data on that. For astronomy, there's the NASA's Global at Night project, but there's also the Philippine Space Agency's PINA Citizen Science Network, where you can also introduce data on this and then help local researchers and communities in doing this. For health sciences, you can help monitor the spread of diseases. For example, community dengue early warning system, CDUs. You can think about like collecting data. Obviously, I think that this is a bit more difficult, the health sciences for secondary schools than, for example, just going out into the field and collecting biodiversity data. But you can think about this. And that integrates these ongoing citizen science projects in classes and gives students hands-on experience in data collection and analysis. We have done this with observation.org, where we ask students, we made this route around our university. This is Hasselt University. We made a route, and we asked the students, collect data. If you're taking a break, go have a walk. And just if you see anything, put it in your ops identify and then in the database. And you see, after a while, we got this. This was the walk. So we got a lot of data on this walk. Obviously, that poses some problems for the analysis, but you see that people are engaged, they want to learn, they want to help. And if you then also talk about them, about how to now work with these data, what are the problems, etc., they learn a lot of this, I think. Also, use citizen science to simplify abstract concepts in mathematics, for example. Things like sampling theory and randomization. This is something that is very easily taught already at high schools, a random sample, and the importance of that. You can really show through citizen science that what the difference is. So suppose you let students collect their own data with, for example, the locations where they collect it, and you obtain the mean biodiversity based on that. And then you say, now we're going to take a random sample, and you look at the differences between what they first got and what you get through the random sample. And then you show how important it is to obtain randomized samples. Probability theory, basic things. You can teach all of that through, again, maybe sampling theory in citizen science. Learn how to summarize data like that with means, with medians, etc. You can all integrate this in citizen science research, and also the importance of hypothesis testing. Think first about what you want to do, and afterwards how you're going to do it, and then do it. And how do you set up a research goal and turn it into a hypothesis test? Then for ecology, for example, biodiversity and ecosystem dynamics, that's quite complex, but if you can do it really with the students through these apps, it can be very rewarding. And an example is an adaptive sampling design, where an adaptive sampling design means that you're going to collect data in different campaigns. And you use the information that you got from the previous campaign to collect new data. And statistical literature has shown that these are very good sampling designs. So suppose that you ask students to collect some data. They go collect data, maybe again about biodiversity or the probability to find a specific species at a specific location. And then, based on the data that you get, you analyze this. These are like, okay, this requires a geostatistical model, but there are very simple tricks to get a heat map based on these data. That's just a one-line code in R, for example, and there are even much easier things to obtain it. An estimate. But also there is uncertainty on this estimate. So you get an estimate, but obviously some of these estimates are much more uncertain than others. And two reasons for this, for uncertainty, increased uncertainty is, for example, here there was no data collected. So we have a lot of uncertainty on what we find here. So we see that the uncertainty, that's dark blue, I mean, you might not see it very well, the dark blue area in the southeastern part of that map, that is showing that there's a lot of uncertainty. What can also happen is if you go to twice to the same location, two different persons, but you get totally different results. So then there's also noise there. So you can quantify uncertainty through, for example, standard deviations and those things, standard errors. So very simple concepts that you can integrate in classes. Now, the nice thing about adaptive sampling is that uncertainty is used to say, okay, now I'm going to collect new data at those locations where there's the largest amount of uncertainty. So these locations in the south get more weights in your new random sample, and you collect therefore more data over here. You join those two data sets and you analyze it again. You get an updated image or an estimate with, again, uncertainty. And that uncertainty will change because now you have more information here, so your uncertainty will stop or will decrease, but you obtain other uncertainty maybe here. And as such, you can continue up until there is not a lot of uncertainty left. But this is something that allows you to teach many concepts to students. I know that this is already quite advanced. This is not for somebody who's 6 years old. But this is something that you can integrate some of these concepts, I think, at the high school level, because this is just what is a random sample, how do you obtain insights from a sample, and what is uncertainty. And we can exploit uncertainty to inform us where to collect new data, etc. Also, it allows us to develop data literacy and critical thinking. I'm almost done. Critical thinking. So you can analyze open data from citizen science initiatives. Students learn to use statistical software, data visualization, can draw conclusions from real and often messy data, and evaluate data quality. Very important. And this strengthens STEM competencies like quantitative reasoning, scientific skepticism. That's all very important. Also, it creates environmental and social awareness if you use citizen science as a paradigm to teach. Citizen science often addresses local and global challenges, like we know, pollution, climate change, biodiversity loss, etc. Now, students learn how science can inform policy and communities, and they learn that science should really be collaborative and participatory if you do that. It's a paradigm to always work in. And therefore, they hopefully appreciate democratization of science, so that science is not something that you do in your ivory tower as a scientist, but you really are working together with communities. And this supports STEM for society, education, and sustainability goals. You can enhance inquiry-based learning through citizen science. For example, teachers can structure lessons around the scientific process. Ask a local question: how does pollution affect coral reef biodiversity? And you go collect data through a citizen science platform together with communities. You analyze and interpret results, and very interesting, communicate this to peers, but also to the communities themselves. And this, again, reinforces next generation science standards, also mentioned by the previous presenter, like model development, research management, and constructing explanations. And then lastly, build skills in collaboration and communication. That's also something that citizen science can help with. For example, working in teams, I bet that many people already do this, but share your findings, and maybe also online. Everybody's sharing everything online. Why wouldn't we do it? Why wouldn't the students try to share something online and then try to give the correct information? And that's a very difficult thing, but that's also something you can try to do. Interact with professionals and with communities and present, for example, at school fairs, but also maybe local council meetings or virtual symposia. And this integrates STEM with communication and civic engagement. Now, last few slides, 2 minutes, the future. Now, I told you about Reef Dream, Coral Reef Diversity Research and Monitoring in the Philippines, which applies the 𝗬𝗏 method. That's the project that I described, that I'm doing together with people from VSU. The 𝗬𝗏 is a citizen science method that empowers local communities to participate in monitoring their reefs, contains simplified protocols, it uses straightforward and survey protocols that require minimal equipment and training. Then you can very rapidly collect data, and especially it's very accessible to non-scientists. It's designed to be easily understood and to be utilized by individuals without having a lot of expertise. And that's a very nice method that is being applied in a few projects at VSU, but it's actually developed by somebody else from another university, but I don't know that person yet. But the person that I'm working with, Rafael Dumoulin, is also working together with that person, and he is implementing 𝗬𝗏 throughout his region. Now, what we want to do is apply for a new... So I told you about the citizen science, the Philippine Citizen Science Network that we were setting up. And we want to formalize that, and through that, integrate the 𝗬𝗏 method, but maybe also, like, it doesn't necessarily only have to be about coral reef monitoring, but just integrate citizen science projects, methods, to collect data on biodiversity in secondary and higher education. So secondary education, maybe also elementary education, if that is possible, but that is our next step, and that's something, a project proposal that we will submit in March 2026. And then hopefully our goal is to establish citizen science a bit more formally in educational curricula across the Philippines. Obviously that will not be super easy, but we will take steps to think about this and to build on this. If you're interested in this, because there are many people who are involved in teaching, you can always contact me because we're still brainstorming on how to do it exactly. And I hope, yeah, if you're interested, you can talk to me. Tonight I'll be back at CLSU, but I'll be here for the afternoon. So if you want to talk with me, definitely do that. And otherwise, if you want to contact me, these are my 2 email addresses. So from Hasselt and KU Leuven, you can email me on both of them. Thank you very much.